I've always said that God doesn't give us more than we can handle. But after listening to the following, you'll see what I just realized. "Watch out! You nearly broadsided that car," my father yelled at me. "Can't you do anything right?" Those words hurt worse than blows. I turned my head towards the elderly man in the seat beside me, daring me to challenge him. A lump rose in my throat as I averted my eyes. I wasn't prepared for another battle. "I saw the car, Dad. Please don't yell at me when I'm driving." My voice was measured and steady, sounding far calmer than I really felt. Dad glared at me, then turned away and settled back. At home, I left Dad in front of the television and went outside to collect my thoughts. Dark, heavy clouds hung in the air with a promise of rain. The rumble of distant thunder seemed to echo my inner turmoil. What could I do about him? Dad had been a lumberjack in the states of Washington and Oregon. He had enjoyed being outdoors and had reveled in pitting his strength against the forces of nature. The years marched on relentlessly. The first time he couldn't lift a heavy log, he joked about it. But later that same day, I saw him outside alone, straining to lift it. He became irritable when anybody teased him about his advancing age, or when he couldn't do something that he had done as a younger man. 4 days after his 67th birthday, he had a heart attack. An ambulance sped him to the hospital, while a paramedic administered CPR to keep blood and oxygen flowing. At the hospital, Dad was rushed into an operating room. He was lucky. He survived. But something inside Dad died. His zest for life was gone. He obstinately refused to follow the doctor's orders. Suggestions and offers of help were turned aside with sarcasm and insults. The number of visitors thinned and then finally stopped altogether. Dad was left alone. My husband and I asked Dad to come live with us on our small farm. We hoped that the fresh air and rustic atmosphere would help him adjust. Within a week after he moved in, I regretted the invitation. It seemed nothing was satisfactory. He criticized everything I did. I became frustrated and moody. And soon, I was taking my pent-up anger out on my husband. We began to bicker and argue. Alarmed, my husband sought out our pastor and explained the situation. The clergyman set up weekly counseling appointments for us. At the close of each session, he prayed, asking God to soothe Dad's troubled mind. But the months wore on and God was silent. Something had to be done, and it was up to me to do it. The next day, I sat down with a phone book and methodically called each of the mental health clinics that were listed in the yellow pages. I explained my problem to each of the sympathetic voices that answered in vain. Just when I was about to give up hope, one of the voices suddenly exclaimed, "I just read something that might help you. Let me go get that article." I listened as she read. The article described a remarkable study done at a nursing home. All of the patients were under treatment for chronic depression. Yet their attitudes had improved dramatically when they were given the responsibility for a dog. I drove right to the animal shelter that afternoon. After I filled out a questionnaire, a uniformed officer led me to the kennels. The odor of disinfectant stung my nostrils as I moved down the row of pens. Each pen contained 5 to 7 dogs. Long-haired dogs, curly-haired dogs, black dogs, spotted dogs, and they all jumped up trying to reach me. I studied each one, but rejected one after the other for various reasons. Too big, too small, too much hair. As I neared the last pen, a dog in the shadows of the far corner struggled to his feet. Then he walked to the front of the run and sat down. It was a pointer, but this was just a caricature of the breed. Years had etched his face and muzzle with shades of gray. His hip bones jutted out in lopsided triangles, but it was his eyes that caught and held my attention. Calm and clear, they beheld me unwaveringly. I pointed to the dog. "Can you tell me about him?" The officer looked, then shook his head in puzzlement. "Well, he's a funny one. Appeared out of nowhere and sat in front of the gate. We brought him in, figuring someone would be right down to claim him. Well, that was 2 weeks ago, and we've heard nothing. His time is up tomorrow." He gestured helplessly. As the words sank in, I turned to the man in horror. "You mean you're going to kill him?" "Ma'am," he said gently, "that's our policy. We don't have room for every unclaimed dog." I looked at the pointer again. The calm brown eyes awaited my decision. "I'll take him," I said. I drove home with the dog in the front seat beside me. When I reached the house, I honked the horn twice. I was helping my prize out of the car when Dad shuffled onto the front porch. "Ta-da! Look what I got for you," I said excitedly. Dad looked, then wrinkled his face in disgust. If I had wanted a dog, I would have gotten one, and I would have picked out a better specimen than that bag of bones. "Keep it. I don't want it." Dad waved his arms scornfully and turned back towards the house. Anger rose inside me. It squeezed together my throat muscles and pounded into my temples. "Well, you better get used to him, Dad. He's staying." Dad ignored me. "Did you hear me, Dad?" I screamed. At those words, Dad whirled angrily, his hands clenched at his sides, his eyes narrowed and blazing with hate. We stood glaring at each other like duelists, when suddenly the pointer pulled free from my grasp. He wobbled towards my dad and sat down in front of him. Then slowly, carefully, he raised his paw. Dad's lower jaw trembled as he stared at the uplifted paw. Confusion replaced the anger in his eyes. The pointer waited patiently. Then Dad was on his knees, hugging the animal. It was the beginning of a warm and intimate friendship. Dad named the pointer Cheyenne. Together, he and Cheyenne explored the community. They spent long hours walking down dusty lanes. They spent reflective moments on the banks of streams, angling for tasty trout. They even started to attend Sunday services. Dad sitting in a pew and Cheyenne lying quietly at his feet. Dad and Cheyenne were inseparable throughout the next 3 years. Dad's bitterness faded, and he and Cheyenne made many friends. Then, late one night, I was startled to feel Cheyenne's cold nose burrowing through our bed covers. He had never before come into our bedroom at night. I woke my husband, put on my robe, and ran into my father's room. Dad lay in his bed, his face serene, but his spirit had left quietly sometime during the night. 2 days later, my shock and grief deepened when I discovered Cheyenne lying dead beside Dad's bed. I wrapped his still form in the rag rug he had slept on. As we buried him near a favorite fishing hole, I silently thanked the dog for the help he had given me in restoring Dad's peace of mind. The morning of Dad's funeral dawned overcast and dreary. This day looks like the way I feel, I thought, as I walked down the aisle to the pews reserved for family. I was surprised to see the many friends Dad and Cheyenne had made filling the church. The pastor began his eulogy. It was a tribute to both Dad and the dog who had changed Dad's life. And then the pastor turned to Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. I often thank God for sending that angel, he said. For me, the past dropped into place, completing a puzzle that I had not seen before. The sympathetic voice that had just read the right article, Cheyenne's unexpected appearance at the animal shelter, his calm acceptance and complete devotion to my father, and the proximity of their deaths. And suddenly I understood. I knew that God had answered my prayers after all. God doesn't give us what we can handle. He helps us handle what we are given. He stands with us and gets us through. In other words, God's grace keeps pace with what we face. Amen.